All right. What's going on, guys? All right. I am home.
All right.
Oh, hold
What's
on.
going on, guys? Oh,
There we go. Sorry, I had to mute myself, otherwise we're going to echo there. Apologies, I don't feel like wearing headphones today. All right. So, let me get the chat back. Okay, so first, second industrial revolution, major things to know about Unit 9. Oh my god, that's a huge ask. Can Unit 9 only be the third LEQ? Yeah, absolutely it could. And the fourth SAQ question. So, okay, we'll go over that. So we'll go over what the requirements for each essay can be, what units they can cover, etc. All right. So I was asked to talk about the British East India Company and specifically its role in. Well, I guess its role in India, the Indian Ocean, all that stuff. So, British East India Company history timeline. Okay, this is sort of fine. Yeah, it's fine. So we'll use this, and we'll go here. All right, no idea where this is or what it's from, but this will probably do us fine. Okay, so the British East India Company is the most prolific and famous of what was called the joint stock companies. Now, well, Connor, it's funny. I was about to mention the Dutch. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, absolutely matters as well. They were the first to use this model, and they did it very successfully. And they did so in Indonesia, took over entirely the island of Java, and ended up being a huge part of that whole system. Sorry. Okay. So, uh, yeah, we'll get to all that stuff. So we're going to do all these things with the East India Company. So let's start with what is a joint stock company. So whether it's the Dutch or the all the European countries had an East India Company eventually. Um, Hold on one second. I'm sorry. 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 Um, sorry, I had to handle that. Anyway, um, the the East India Company. Sorry, so joint stock companies. All European countries have joint stock companies at this time, and what they are is based on the Dutch model. The Dutch did it first, and it was a corporation. And the idea of it is, I don't want to, as a rich person with ships, go out there and take the risk of pirate storms, whatever, destroying my cargo, ending my fortunes, ending my chances of doing well, ending my chances of making a lot of money, destroying my livelihood, etc. That risk is on me. So what I'd much rather do, what's much more sensible from my perspective, is to go out there and say, okay, how about I get somebody to help me split the expenses and therefore split the risk. So it's going to cost me, I'll make up a number, $100,000 to send this ship out. Then $100,000. Anyway, to send the ship out across the oceans, and I get instead 10 people to help me do it. We can each split it $10,000 a piece, and the risk is only 10%. So if the ship goes down, we all have 90% of that money that we could have spent on this trip, and we all have it still in our pockets. It's that simple. Now, there's also a splitting of the wealth, but of course this multiplies, right? You can scale this. So if I can invest $10,000 in one ship and I have $100,000, I can invest $10,000 in 10 ships, and now if 9 of them come back profitably and one of them gets lost, we still win. And we keep scaling that, and that is how these companies worked. Okay, so that was the basic idea of them. Now, we'll start with the Dutch. So the Dutch VOC ends up in Indonesia. So if you don't remember where that is, let me get a global map out here. AP World Regional Map. Make sure that when you talk about the world in AP World, you are really referring to the regional map. This is the map that, here we go. This is the map that I've been hanging on the wall all year long. It's the map I asked you to memorize in the summer assignment, and it still remains true today. This is the regional map. So Southeast Asia is roughly what we're calling Indonesia here. These islands of Sumatra and so on, Java, these islands over here. This is where the Dutch East India Company establishes its stronghold. Now, a lot of the East India companies, the Dutch and the British in particular, will become political players. They'll physically own land that they will take over. That will not be an immediate process. We'll talk about that with the British one for a second. But they will take over land. And they'll become more than just a company. They'll become the actual government. They'll become the army that protects their own interests, a navy that protects their own. They're operating independently of the governments they come from. The only real officialness that they have is that they obtain a license, a monopoly license from the government, in which they promise the government that we want monopoly rights to trade on behalf of our people. So in other words, if I'm the Dutch East India Company, no other company from the Netherlands can operate in the East Indies except for us, and the government, you have to guarantee us that right. In return, we cut you, old government, in for what is usually 20% of all profit. For the government, it's a win, right? You sign a paper, you send it off, whatever these guys make, they make, and you just get free money out of it, right? It's that simple. And the more successful they are, the more free money you get. So that's sort of the attitude of it. And that was fine for the governments. The governments were happy to have that deal. So whether it's the kings of this country, that country, Britain, Netherlands, doesn't matter. They were all pretty happy to have the deal of we just get free money and you take on all the wealth, all the expenses, all the risk, all the danger, all the problems, all the financing, all the you handle all the infrastructure, you handle all the that stuff. We don't care. You send us our 20%, we're happy, right? That's why it went on for so long. Now, you can see that charter they're talking about is that monopoly power, that they have the right to have this East India thing. And they set up factories in India. And you can see for yourself that they start to make these like trade centers. Now, what's really going on there? Don't mind me. I'm literally just getting home. And like I'm still in my coat. So if I take off my shoes, you'll forgive me. But the East India Company, among other companies, we'll focus on them for a minute. In India, they set up in what is the region of Bombay. Or Bengal, excuse me. It's a similar place. So if we go India map, East India, EIC, here we go. Yeah, that's a good one. We like that map right there. That's a great one. All right, no. Yeah, this older map. So see Bengal right over here? That's the area where the British East India Company sets up shop originally. That's where they kind of are in full control of the territory. Now, the way they get that is pretty simple. They follow this indirect rule pattern, right, which is something that goes on in this second wave of imperialism, and these Europeans are very good at this, where rather than try to go in and physically take somebody out, that happens later, but for now, it's can I find a local guy who wants to get paid? Let me fix my camera. It's way out of focus, and it's freaking me out. Hold on. So do I want to find a local guy who would like to get paid? Because if I do, that local guy can become my buddy, and we can enact all kinds of policy through that local guy. There we go. Better. All right, so if we find somebody local that we can work with who wants to get paid, who wants to get more powerful, who wants to defeat some of his ancient enemies or something like that, if we get that guy on our side, well then guess what? We're now in charge. And we use that person as our intermediary. I don't want to use the word puppet, because puppet implies like the British have this insane power and the locals can do nothing about it. It's not really that. It's a partnership. Everybody's winning here. Well, the elites are winning, the elite Indians are winning, and the British are winning. So that's how it goes. Now, keep in mind, this was not a certainty. At the time, the French also had interest in this area, and the French were also backing local Indians against the British-backed Indians. But in the end, the British do win. They win at the Battle of Plassey. That's what's mentioned here. So Robert Clive of the East India Company defeats, again, this is the business has an army, okay, their army defeats the army of the Nawab of Bengal. Sounds very impressive. He was a little kid, all right, and they more or less bought off all of the kid's friends and had them betray him. It wasn't a particularly like glorious victory. It was more like, oh, you didn't know that you got sold out, fella. That sucks to be you. So the British begin by establishing this foothold in Bengal, where they start setting up offices and start to establish financial controls there. Now, Bengal is going to be quite important for later history of the East India Company. Over time, the East India Company will spread and will begin to take over more and more and more land. And eventually, you get to this situation here. So if you look here, this is late 1764, right? So here is the Nawab of Bengal, right? There you go. This is the situation. You got some spots over here where you already have the Netherlands having some territory. But this is India at the time before the British show up. So what are you looking at? You're looking at a place that is utterly and completely disorganized, disunified. So to the extent that there is a Mughal dynasty, sure, but these are the people who live here, and a lot of them are under the sort of the thumb of the Mughals, but they're not like fully under control of the Mughals. So we don't want to go too far and make it seem like, okay, the Mughals had no power, but at the same time, each of these is an independent state with an independent prince that rules a chunk of territory. Now, some of them basically are vassals to the Mughals, but again, we should not pretend like this is some place that's just, well, obviously and clearly under the control of a sort of a Mughal emperor. Not really, all right? Not really anymore. And that is more and more and more becoming the case. And this is before the British even really get there and do their thing, all right? Now, go back for a second. So, you'll see here the growth of British territory. So, the brown into the orange into the tan are basically the British conquests here of the, again, East India Company conquest. There's no British government here. This is a company with an army just doing their thing, right? So they start here in Bengal and they begin to move from there, and they sort of take over more and more and more territory. Now, some of these places, like over here in the Punjab, in the Brahmaputra River Valley, over here in sort of northern India, this remains territory that is largely under the sway of the Mughals. But, and then there's the Marathas here. Sorry again. Sorry. Sorry. Oh my goodness. The gas company puts scent in it for that reason. I'll come look later if you want. Sorry. Apologies. This is live on air. So, the British are taking control of India in this way. And eventually they do, in fact, just continue to take full control time after time. More and more and more of these elite Hindu princes in particular, tend to back the British because they view the Mughals as a bigger threat. And there's sort of a nice happy partnership where the... All right, I can't do this. That's a problem for later. So that's what happens. Anyway, now let's move on. In this area of Bengal, all right, there isn't a region. Now, sorry, I'm really sorry. So, lost my train of thought. Apologies. All right, so in this region, this is outside information. No document's ever going to talk about this, but it's kind of interesting to add if you have to talk about this stuff. There is a region in India, all right, if you go to Google Maps, and this does have something to do with this, called Darjeeling. Now, Darjeeling is right over here. It's this area within India right here, okay? And if you zoom out, you'll notice where it's at. It's in Bengal. It's in that territory over there. Okay? I can't just. The gas company puts sent in. That's it. Sorry. Somebody's freaking out about whether or not there's a gas leak. Anyway, so over here in Bengal, this area up over here is where the British end up discovering one of the most fertile pieces of land in the entire world. And this fertile piece of land is Darjeeling. And it has very, very, very rich nutrients because you get a ton of runoff from the Himalayan mountains into it. It's still true today. This is where the British East India Company discover that they can create some of the most potent narcotics the world has ever seen in the form of opium. They grow the poppies there, and all right, they grow the poppies there, and the poppies that they grow are then harvested for their opium sap, and that opium sap is sent off to, or harvested and sent off to, local Indian factories, right? So the East India Company owns. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Sorry, back. Okay. So, let's start over. The British East India Company take over the area of Bengal, and in Bengal, they're able to establish some of the most fertile land that exists in anywhere in the world and use it to grow poppies. Those poppies can be harvested for their sap. Their sap turns into opium. All right? So, the opium that is being harvested not by the British East India Company. They own the land. And they're growing the flowers. They're selling the rights to the flowers to the local Indian elites who are running factories. Again, these are guys tied in with the British system at this point. They're all about it. They're all a part of this. This is going to lead to China, which is why I'm bringing it up. And then as they harvest this stuff, they package it. The Indians do this in Indian-owned factories, and they are in turn selling it not to the East India Company because they're not allowed to sell opium. It's a drug. Everybody knows it's a narcotic. Absolutely true. Instead, what they do is they sell it on to smugglers. Now, who are these smugglers? The smugglers are largely, let's zoom out again. The smugglers are largely going to be largely going to be Europeans, whether they're British, Scottish, American, something like that, a bunch of them, who are sailing in these waters and trading. Now, how could you do that? The East India Company has full rights to this trade. The East India Company sold licenses. They basically sub-licensed other companies. So that's where the Jardine Company comes in. They were sub-licensed to the East India Company. So it's like, all right, we want a piece of the action. So the East India Company goes, all right, you want a piece of the action? No problem. Give us 30% of all your profits. And you could trade out here. So again, it's free money. So that free money becomes this. Now, this also lets the East India Company wipe their hands and say, we don't sell drugs, we sell flowers. I don't know what happens after that. These silly Indians be harvesting it for something. I don't know. They do whatever they do with it. That gives the East India Company plausible deniability. They know what's going on, but they give them plausible deniability. Those smugglers, again, a lot of whom are European, Scottish, whatever, they sail through the Straits of Malacca past Singapore, up over here into southern China. When you get to southern China, there are two major trade cities right here. There is Macau, which was controlled by the Portuguese, and then later Hong Kong, which would later be controlled by the British. We'll get to that. But the reason they're sailing over here is because this was the only port that Europeans were allowed to trade in. They were allowed to trade in the port of Canton, what is today Guangzhou, and that's this port right over here. So you go up the Pearl River. It's right over here. And boom, you go into the port of Canton and you sell your stuff. And remember, there were these like special areas where the Europeans were allowed to go, and that was it. They weren't allowed into the port, etc. And the only good the Chinese would actually take, that they would accept from Europeans, is silver. They would take raw cash silver for their Chinese goods. So if you want tea, you want silk, you want porcelain, any of that, you need silver. Okay. The Europeans don't have enough silver to pay for all that. So where are you going to get it? It turns out the only people who have that much silver are the Chinese. How do you get silver out of China if the Chinese don't want to buy any of your products? Well, right over here, around these many islands near the island of Hong Kong, there's Hong Kong Island over here and then Lantau Island over there, all right? Near these islands is all these little islands. Well, if you zoom in, there's a bunch of tiny little islands in here as well, like you see yourself. European smugglers would meet up with Chinese drug merchants, who were this is basically like drug gangs, who were willing to pay cash money, silver, to buy the drugs from the Europeans. So the Europeans would sell the drugs to them. No opium is exchanging hands between European and Chinese on the actual soil of China. None. And then they take that silver, they go up over here, and now they sail into port and they go, oh yeah, we got tons of silver. We want to buy silk, we want to buy tea, we want to buy all that. And that leads to the Hong system, where you have a Chinese merchant known as a Kohong. That Kohong is working with you as a merchant. And they negotiate all your sales, all your prices, all your things, and they're the ones who get your product. You, European, are not allowed into the major port. You have to stay in your little area we've walled off. We bring in your product, you give us the cash, and you get the hell out of here and come back next time. And that's the entirety of the trade system. So it's opium for silver, for tea, silk, and other things, back then to the East India Company, where a lot of these companies would then sell. Hold on, zoom out. Zoom out even more. A lot of these companies would then go back to the East India Company, sell those products to the East India Company, who would then take them back to Europe, sell them. They'd get the money from the East India Company in profits, buy more opium, and repeat the process. Now later, these companies become very bold. They go so far as to even setting up factories inside of Guangzhou where they store their opium. Like, they just become very brazen about it at that point. They're bribing all the local merchants and so on. This leads to a conflict. This conflict is called the First Opium War. Now we need the Chinese timeline. I got that over here. No, it's not. Where is it? Boom, bang, bang, boom. Nope, none of those. Where the hell did I put it? There it is. So here's the First Opium War. Your First Opium War, if I have to remember, I want to say 1837? 1830. Oh, pretty close. Pretty close. First Opium War, 1839. And the 1839 war lasts for a little bit. And what ends up happening is the Chinese more or less get their clock cleaned. There is a second Opium War that happens after that. So, Opium War 2. 1857, 1859. So you have a gap in the middle. So I bring this up only because I want you to see why this gap exists. So your first Opium War, 1837, takes a few years, but it is resolved. And when it's resolved, the Chinese are just absolute losers in the whole thing. They simply cannot compete with European ships. Despite the fact that the Chinese had very large ships, these Chinese junks were huge. They didn't have the modern capacity, sailing speed, ordnance, or anything like that of European ships. Even the merchant ships of the smugglers, which were known as clipper ships, were some of the fastest ships on the world at the time, and they carry enough cannon that they could actually destroy Chinese warships. So it wasn't really a contest of any meaning. And once the Chinese fleets were no longer able to compete in Canton waters, that allowed the Europeans to basically sit off the coast, bomb the city from the coastline, and more or less force the city to concede defeat. And that is how the First Opium War concludes. This is the start of that century of humiliation. And it'll continue all the way until you get to Mao Zedong, where you would think it would show it somewhere. Oh, right here. This line right here. That republic into the People's Republic. The People's Republic of China is actually the communist government. So during that time, a lot of stuff is going to happen in China. So you have your First and Second Opium War. Between them, just between them, you have the Taiping Rebellion breakout. The Taiping Rebellion is a disaster. So if you don't remember, the Taiping Rebellion was literally a failed Confucian scholar who never passed the exams, ends up losing his mind, having some sort of a fit, hallucination, whatever, and ends up having a total breakdown where he is made to believe in his visions that he is Jesus's Chinese brother, the actual Jesus, and that he will one day go to heaven to be with Jesus. And when that was so, in the meanwhile, his job was to establish Jesus's kingdom there in China. So now he becomes this ultra religious revolutionary, and then that revolutionary movement makes up the Taiping Rebellion. What starts as a small rebellion grows into a huge rebellion, and he ends up taking over like a third of the country. It's absolutely a horrendous amount of death toll too. The Taiping Rebellion had some incredible death numbers. Hang on. Taiping death toll. Alright, check this out. Oh, come on. So, the death toll between the Taiping Rebellion, 1850-1864, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the American Civil War. The Taiping Rebellion are green. The Bolsheviks is the Russian Communist Revolution that brought them into power, and that's blue. And then the Civil War, the American Civil War, a 3-year bloody conflict. Compare all that to the green. The green is the Taiping. The Taiping Rebellion was an unbelievably lethal thing. It was truly one of the worst, most bloodiest conflicts in human history, and all because some guy thought he was Jesus' brother. Now, it's a little simplistic. It's not the only reason why. Those long drawn-out, ancient kind of, what's the word I want to use? Ancient hatreds between different cultures, or between different racial groups within China, different Chinese ethnicities. That was brewing forever. And there's always been this kind of idea in China of the mandate of heaven and some new religious group declaring that the old empire is dead and the new empire must rise. That's an old situation. That's nothing that's really new. But the scale is incredible. And again, it's just one more way. Where did my typing thing go? It's just one more. Did I delete my timeline? No. It's just one more way in which the Qing are on the way out. Remember, the Qing themselves are Manchu, so they're not particularly popular among the Chinese in the first place. Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, Luke. I think you could say China lost both times because they were not industrialized. Now, after the First Opium War is concluded, the Taiping Rebellion goes on, and the Second Opium War is concluded, there is an actual attempt by some Chinese officials to do a thing called the self-strengthening movement. It might come up. And what it is some of the government says, look, we actually can embrace this technology. We don't need to reject it. And the reason why their argument is there's nothing Europeans make that we ourselves as Chinese did not create the initial technology for. So, for example, who created the cog? The gear that goes in a machine and spins around. Well, the Chinese did. So if Europeans are making cog-based machinery, engines, well, the Chinese, these guys are saying, well, we can claim that future technology as ours because we created the initial technology. So we don't have to run from it. Because the whole idea of not using European technology was ethnocentrism. It's not the Chinese way, therefore it must be bad. Even if it's objectively correct, right? That was the problem. Even if it's objectively better, no, it's not Chinese. We're not going there. And there was an attempt to reform. There was an attempt to fix, but look where it is. It's on the wrong side of this, right? Instead of being before everything went to hell, it happens after everything went to hell. And it doesn't really stick because there's major resistance, especially at the highest levels of government. Empress Xixia is a conservative who doesn't want to see any change in her society, even when that change is desperately necessary. And so she resists it. And in resisting it, she helps to doom the country to be eventually defeated. Now, it gets worse, right? Because in the middle of all this nonsense, the first Sino-Japanese War happens. Sino being Chinese, Japanese being, Japanese, and the Japanese win. There's a revolution that ends up taking out the Qing. We talked about this already. There was the Boxer Rebellion, where literally 8 allied European nations and Japan, so 7 European nations and Japan, or 6 and... It was 6 Europeans, America, and Japan, I believe was the 8. They end up invading China to save Europeans in China from marauding gangs of monks who were beheading Americans or Germans or whoever was there because they were convinced that they were the righteous fists of heaven. I think that was quite literally the name of the movement, and that their job was to kick out all the foreigners, and that included the Manchus. But the Manchus, the government ends up backing them, saying, hey, I know you don't like us, but you must really hate them more. They're real barbarians. We're all Chinese here, right? And it ends up a disaster. The Boxer Rebellion is quashed by these European armies. The government is basically toppled, more or less, not exactly. They've kind of seized the government and kind of put it under sort of like provisional watch, more or less. And that's how the Qing kind of slowly dies off until there is this revolution by Sun Yat-sen that brings the Republic of China, which really is not a great name. The Republic of China is a nice name, but in reality, it's a nationalist government run by a nationalist party that never really manages to get control of the entire country in a meaningful way. They don't actually manage to bring about real peace. There's constant civil war between warlords, the government, other power players. The Japanese are still, rolling around in here. It's a disaster. The communists show up. They're fighting. A total mess. And it does take eventually the end of World War II to actually bring about a resolution, because the Japanese need to be defeated before that they're even able to resolve this inner conflict in China, the resolution of which is going to be the establishment of the People's Republic of China, which is a very nice way of saying a communist totalitarian state run by one of the most horrifying leaders in world history, responsible for an untold amount of death, probably over 100 million dead by his hands, an absolute monster named Mao Zedong. So that is that's the trail by which British East India Company trade led to opium, led to the destabilization of the Qing, led to a whole bunch of problems, led to the century of humiliation, and eventually led to a Chinese communist takeover. Now, what is the story of the British East India Company back in India? Well, back in India, let's go back to India. Back in India, the British East India Company continues to establish their power, and it stays that way until 1857. In 1857, a rumor gets out there that the British East India Company has been greasing the musket balls of their cartridges for their muskets with pork fat and beef fat, and that this was being done in order to taint the souls of Hindus and Muslims so they'd be forced to convert into Christianity because they would be no longer fit for Islam or Hinduism. This was a rumor. This is not what happened. The Europeans didn't have some grand scheme to sort of spiritually poison people by making them break their, their halal, rules. Not at all. It was simply they didn't care. They're white Europeans who were Christians. They didn't care about the religious beliefs of the locals and didn't really give a crap. And to be fair, the Sepoy Rebellion wasn't really about that. That was the match, right? What it really was about was a century of foreign rule where slowly but surely this company had chipped away and forced away customs that these people treasured. Even the ones they didn't really like, it was still the case of, well, you're taking away the way we do things. So even though I may be wrong, even though this may be an old custom, even it might end up with innocent women dying in a fire because their husbands died, so what? It's not my problem. This is the way we like it. We do it our way. You don't say nothing, get out, right? Everybody understands that mentality. Nobody wants to be told what to do. And so that's the real sort of long-term reason. And it blows up. And that blowing up quite literally blows up into a huge civil conflict where the British Navy, and this is not the East India Company now, this is the government and the military, is forced to come in with the British Army and put down this rebellion. Afterwards, the Crown of England, the government, says you are no longer going to be running India. You've goofed it up totally. And the charter for the East India Company is revoked. And the entirety of Britain now is no longer an East India Company holding. Sorry, the entirety of India is no longer an East India Company holding. It is now officially governed by the British government, and we call that the British Raj. So the East India Company rule goes until 1857, after which it is the Raj, the British Raj, R-A-J, which means the British government run by the British Crown in British India. And after that, the East India Company kind of fades away into obscurity over the next few years, not really being profitable enough anymore to manage. All right, that was kind of a long-winded, but there you go. All right, what we got? Difference between first and second. All right, so let's talk about what that even means. So first industrial revolution. Now, the first industrial revolution is pretty typically this one. All right, the Industrial Revolution, the one we think about, the one where Europeans are making their stuff in factories and steam engines are getting invented and so on. And the date range on that you can see is that 1760, 1750 in Britain all the way through 1840, right? That's typically what we tend to look at it as. Now, if you look at the second Industrial Revolution, all right, this here is like the tail end right after that. So this is when those technologies are fully in place, and now you start to see some sort of a combined technology. I typically don't differentiate them because this is typically more about standardization and mass production. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. The Bessemer process, which is a mass producing of steel process, is invented, I want to say, in this time, if my memory serves. They had already learned how to create steel during the Industrial Revolution, but creating it on a mass scale, scaling it, that was where the Second Industrial Revolution came along. It was the thing where, like, you have the steam engine, you perfected it, okay, cool. Can we go to a new thing? Can we do internal combustion? Okay, we can, great. Can we go to a new thing? Like, for example, instead of using steam powered by coal, can we look into, like, other sources of power? Like, for example, can oil stop being just a lubricant and now also be a power source? Those are the kind of differentiations or distinctions you see here, okay? That's the stuff that's going on in this spot. So, that is, and I would not, again, go too far to separating the two of them. Wrought iron, see the Bessemer process. See, it's right here. I was right. It's in this time period. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Is there a real need to differentiate? I don't think so. Not in this course, honestly. If you treat the whole thing as one long line of industrialization, I think you're in fine shape. I wouldn't really make a distinction between the two. I mean, does a fine distinction help if you're writing about it? Yeah, I don't think you're going to get... Like, this is the place you get things like, vaccines and stuff like that, and the invention of quinine as a way to tackle malaria, and the creation of like like the Lewis gun as opposed to like the Gatling gun. Like those kinds of things happen in this era here. The making of poisonous gas that we're going to see used in World War I. That's all part of this. It's like a chemical thing. It's not just mechanical. It's chemical. It's other forms of science being utilized here alongside those mechanical advancements of the first Industrial Revolution. All right, what else? One of the major things to know about, all right, that's complicated, but let's do that. And then I see something about DBQs and all that. All right, so let's go here. Let's go here. All right. So this is still effective and valid for what I can tell. What I remember, this is the newest version of this thing, but it doesn't matter. It's all the same. All right. If we go down to the actual exam, okay, this describes section by section how this all works. So once again, you have 3 short answer questions. Let's just go over what's on every part of the test. The multiple choice can be everything, right? That's just that. It can be everything. Now, first one. Question 1 is anything from the entire course. 1200 to 2001 is the entire course. Question 2 is anything from the entire course. The only difference between the two is they guarantee you short answer question 1 will be a secondary source, and short answer question 2 will be a primary source. I don't know how much that really matters at all, but there you go. Now, short answer questions 3 and 4 do have time restrictions. 3 can only be between 1200 and 1750, and 4 can be between 1750 and 2001. Basically, first half of the course versus second half of the course. So if there's a particular half of the course you're more in tune with, you think, give more weight to choosing that particular question over the other. Remember, that's where your choices lie. Now, the DBQ cannot stretch back to 1200. I'll let you venture a guess as to why. Answer is, they want to give room for context. They do not want to have you have to reach back into time periods before the course covers, even if I've covered them, and have to search there for context on early issue essays, like 1200-ish issue essays. So they don't go that far back. Malvagno, can I use what you taught us about the old stuff from before 1200 as context? Absolutely, yes, if it applies. Yeah, no doubt. But they have to give some window within the course, 1200 to 2001, to allow for context to be discussed. By pulling this date forward a little bit, it lets you use that first 200 years of the course as effectively a context and outside information bubble to pull from. It's not always going to be helpful, but it is sometimes helpful. So that's how that works. Now, the LEQs. The LEQs go like this. You have three options. Option 1, 1200 to 1750, full first half of the course, right? Option 2, the middle of the course, 1450 to 1900. It's the middle two time periods. And the last one's always from 1750 onwards. Can you get an LEQ that is totally modern, about globalization? That's it. Yes, I see it all the time. It's fairly common. Those can be very easy to write. They could also be very hard to write. It depends on how skilled you are at making an argument and being very, very careful not to oversimplify and overgeneralize anything. 1 second. Text me when done and I'll let you know. Streaming. So, sorry, people outside. All right, so that's this time period. That's how the essays break down. I mean, obviously, my strong preference is you stay within the first two. Whoops. I don't often see, in my experience, the first two essays are the most successful essays. All right. So that's my opinion. All right, what else do we have here? Decolonization in Africa. Yeah, sure. The best way to do decolonization in Africa is to have a couple of examples at hand. The examples are all kind of the same. In all cases, pretty much. Europeans have already drawn the map. So let's look that up, right? So hang on. Okay. This little clicky here is showing the order of independence, the order in which African nations become independent between 1950 and 2011. Yes, it takes up to 2011. Now, if you notice at the beginning of this particular GIF, there was actually one country that was already independent. That's Ethiopia. Ethiopia has never been conquered by Europeans successfully, so they've resisted. Check that. I think the Italians under Mussolini did it in World War II. But beyond that, they resisted it. They've never been colonized, that's for sure. And the reason why is kind of interesting. So the reason why the Ethiopians have never been colonized is because they're not eligible. They're Christian. Ethiopians are Coptic Christian. They're one of the oldest Christian traditions in world history. So as a result, they never were valid targets for imperialism. You have to remember, I mean, that didn't stop people from trying, yeah, but they were never valid targets. So Ethiopia being right over here. So since they were not, they were a Christian state, you couldn't use the excuse of social Darwinism. You know, I got to drag you up, guys, because you're all a bunch of savages, and you know your souls are going to hell. That wasn't valid for them. They were Christians. Like, how could you get away with that? You know, logic don't make no sense. All right. So that was the situation there. What else? So there's that one. Now, what is the process? The process is pretty similar. A lot of these colonies are controlled by multiple, like one nation controls multiple colonies. So if we go back to the map of African colonization, right? I'm sure I have a map. There you go. Like if you look at this, there aren't a lot of countries that really need to do this thing, right? So for example, purple, right? France is purple. The French withdrawing from these territories means they withdraw pretty much from all their territories more or less at the same time, okay? There's some variance, as you can see on the map. There's like, okay. But it became a situation where post-World War I, the European powers started to realize, and this is 1939. Post-World War I, the European powers started to realize that these colonies are going to be very, very, very difficult to maintain. Post-World War II, they started to realize they're impossible to maintain. The truth is, they became too expensive. This is a thing that you don't learn about sometimes, but the myth is that European countries, governments, made a killing off of controlling these colonies. That is a myth. These colonies were a net loss. it cost more money to run the colonies than the colonies earned for the European governments. Now, I'm making a distinction. If you were a European company having access to these cheap goods or these cheap resources, that absolutely was a profit maker. So the companies found it very profitable, but at the expense of the government. The government had to foot the bill for this. So you were in this weird situation where the government's losing money running these colonies, but the businesses and the elites are making money on you losing money running the colonies. And that becomes a bit of a problem locally in these governments' politics. But eventually it became one of those things where it just became too disgusting to continue on. And I do mean that. Europeans began to really have a sense that this is not a moral venture. And the more it became known, the more it became a problem. I'll give you a simple example. The British government, the British state, was the first country to actively try to end the global slave trade. They deployed their warships to end the global slave trade. Why would they do that? They did that because news reports started to be distributed in newspapers in Britain outlining what exactly the slave trade was and how England was a part of it. And the public of Britain began to demand that this is an illegitimate, immoral, unethical practice. We don't want any part of it. And by the way, we should be actively stopping it. And that forced the British Crown into becoming, rather than a slave-selling country, a country dedicated to the end of slavery as a mission for the state. So it just shows you that the average person didn't really have eyes on the ground as to what was going on in these colonies. And even if you were a Brit living in these colonies, or a Frenchman, or whomever, you lived the good life, right? You weren't living with the poor locals. So for you, life was great. It was a paradise to a certain extent. And obviously those people had a very different opinion about whether or not these colonies should be abandoned, right? That was pretty common. But slowly but surely, these states do get independence. And they're kind of guided by a similar principle to what happened in India. Whereas you have the Indian National Congress, here you have the African National Congress and the concept of Pan-Africanism. Pan meaning across, like across the whole thing. Like if you pan the camera, panorama, right? And the idea of Pan-Africanism is a movement of African national-born peoples saying, hey, as an African peoples, we need to band together to ensure African stability, sovereignty, and freedom from European oppressors, European colonialists. The problem is that doesn't last very long because Africans are not a group. It's like saying all white people are a group, all black people are a group. They're not a group. They're a bunch of little tiny groups that don't particularly get along, have their own agendas, have their own rivalries, have their own power struggles. And as a result, they don't get along at all. And that leads to things like Rwanda's massacre, where black Rwandans are killing black Rwandans because one group has decided the other group are roaches and cockroaches who need to be wiped out. Like, that's what happened. So you do get those kind of situations. You get that kind of stuff right, just like that. So that is absolutely the case. So that's kind of the overview of it. I would look up South Africa as a real case study, and I would learn about Egypt as well, because Egypt is interesting. Egypt gets independence because it's always treated as like this anomaly in Africa. It is it's Egypt, man, right? It's like the old school state of world history. And Europeans always respected it in a weird way. Like they always had a fascination with Egypt, especially the French did. And so this idea that the Egyptians need to be treated a little bit differently. When they get independence, they're able to sort of like work with the British, and it's kind of like, okay, you're anti-Ottoman, so we get it. Remember, there's a couple of those European states, those European mandates in post-Ottoman Middle East, Egypt being one of them, that were created or taken over by Europeans with the expectation that they would be turned into independent countries when Europeans felt they no longer needed to be sort of had their hands held and baby spoon fed. And Egypt was in that boat. So a lot of this was kind of planned obsolescence. The Europeans post-World War II realized they needed to get out of these colonies. It was simply not worth it. The juice was not worth the squeeze anymore, and things were not really to Europeans' favor. What else? Looks like LEQ rubric. All right, so LEQ rubric. Let's do that. This is the official rubric. Let me just make sure. 2017. Hold on. Yep, it's the same. So they changed the DBQ rubric, but this is the same. All right. Yeah, Carson, that's where Commonwealth of Nations come from. It was the idea that Britain wanted to give some countries effective independence, but those countries relied heavily on British industry and British economics, so they tied them together anyway. There was also this idea that, well, you're still part of the king's realm, the Queen's realm. You're still part of the English crown, still rules you. That's why Canada still has, like, the Queen of England, the King of England on their money. Okay, so this is this. And I'll be honest, I'm already starting to fade. I do apologize for that. I'll definitely go to at least 9, and we'll see what happens from there. But it's been a day. Like, you have no idea it's been a day. So, thesis. 1 point, same as the DBQ. You got to have an argument that directly responds to the prompt. Make sure it does directly respond to it. Make sure there's an extent. And make sure you have at least 2 categories of investigation. You don't need 3. The third category is extraneous. It's to cover yourself if the others are bad. I would stick to 2 good, well thought out categories. So I'm sure someone's asking for an example. So I'll need a DBQ prompt. Let me pull one up. All right, so let's get an LEQ prompt right now. All right, so we'll do number 3. Actually, I'll do a different one because I did this with my class today, and they won't really benefit too much from it. Let me get the Form B out here. All right, here are LEQs. Let's do the first one. So they don't give you a rubric, Mo. Look right here. This is your rubric. On your screen, you'll get these bullets. That's the rubric. It is the rubric. It's just not laid out nicely the way I do. All right, and they don't spell it out super clearly, but that is the rubric right there. Those are the bullets that you're earning points on. Okay, those are 6 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Yeah, so those are your bullets right there. That's what you're earning points on. So that is effectively the rubric. Now, if I was going to pick one of these, I would do... All right, let's do 4. Let's do 4. 4 is pretty easy. During the 20th century, 1900, 2000, right? Competing political and economic interests along with intense nationalism contributed to global conflict. Sure did. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which nationalism was the most important factor contributing to global conflict during this period. Okay. So, I can't speak for Mr. Mann's kids, but for my kids, we did a massive deep dive. I don't want to hear a word about it. Into totalitarian states and the various flavors they come in, all of which relied upon something kind of like a nationalism, not all of them, but many of them, especially the fascist ones, in the 20th century. We did this for days. It was on the board. I said, here's a theological fascist society. Here's what Italian and German fascism looks like. Here's what communism looks like. All right, so... nationalism doesn't have to be bad. Nationalism is not a naughty word. Nationalism means pride in your culture and your country. Now, what defines a culture is typically what defines a nation. Not all cultures, not all nations, not all nationalities view themselves under the same lens and incorporate the same groups. We'll get to that in a minute. Simply living in a place together with somebody else does not mean that they view you as part of their in-group nationally. All right? Now, nationalism as its own is not bad. In fact, it often leads people to desire the ability to rule themselves. By that I mean, I don't want a foreigner ruling me. I want to rule me. I want to be able to pick my rulers. And I want them to sound like me. And by that I mean speak the same language. I want them to look like me. By that I mean if I'm black, I don't want to be ruled by a white European. If I'm a black African or whatever it might be. And so that is that is nationalism. This idea that you have pride in your culture, pride in your country, and you intend to be ruled by your own people using your own decision-making process to come up with that. That's what it basically boils down to. Now, in the case of the 20th century, how did nationalism lead to conflicts, you'll be talking about the ultranationalists, the fascists in Italy, the fascists in Germany, the fascist militarist state of Japan, and the that'll do. I'm trying to think of anything else that might be there, but that'll do. I mean, you could do nationalism in like China and all that stuff, but I don't know if you'd really do that. Could use the Cold War for number 4? No, I wouldn't think so. What are you going to say? The Cold War is an era of time spanning 70 years in the entire globe. Well, 70 years. I mean, I would say you could extend it to beyond the end of World War II, before World War II ends. What would be your, I don't know what you'd really say about the Cold War as a thing. Now, are there conflicts in the Cold War driven by nationalism? Absolutely. But the Cold War itself is not a nationalist concept. It's an ideological concept. It's an economic concept. It's not a nationalist concept. It's not that nobody wanted, it's not one of those cases where it's like, oh, nobody wants a Russian people for the Russian, state for the Russians. That wasn't an argument. I wouldn't go that route. I would go down the route I'm going to go down, which is let's talk Nazis, let's talk fascists, let's talk that stuff. Let's do that. That's what I would do. I would argue nationalism that way. So, for example, if I need categories, I'd say something like this. This is my point, was to get you an LEQ sort of prompt. I would say nationalism played an important role played the most important role, because they asked you that. Nationalism plays the most important role in contributing to global conflict during the period of the 20th century. This is demonstrated by the rise of Nazism and its eventual and eventually World War II. That comes from that. Again, I'm rambling. I would clean that up a little bit if I was writing it. But the rise of Nazism, which led to World War II, comma, and I need a second one, and I might say something like the ultra-nationalistic tendencies pushed by the Japanese government that led to regional conquest at the time in this period, whatever. That's something like that. So now my two categories are going to be talking about nationalism as a fascist ideology and what that looks like, and then nationalism as a fascist militarist ideology that is brought by the Japanese to do the things they do in the region to establish an empire, whatever the hell it is, right? Something like that. So that'd be the way in which I'd approach that in terms of thesis point. Now, the rest of the essay's points, right? So you have thesis and context. Context should be, again, that thing immediately before this era, whatever the topic is, that makes this topic worthy of discussion. That'd be the first thing I would do, without a doubt. Put it first in the page, first thing you write, do your context. Do not leave it blank, huge mistake. Evidence. So evidence comes in two forms. The first form is to simply state enough evidence. In this case, you need 3 at a minimum, I believe. There's no minimum. It's not DBQ. You need to have evidence that is compelling, that is worthy of discussion. It's hard for me to find that for you. It's one of those you know it if you see it type of thing. And then if you use that evidence to support your argument, that's to your benefit as well. That's the second point of evidence. I wouldn't do how many evidence pieces. I don't know what a piece of evidence means to you. I could take one idea and go on for 3 pages. You could take 3 ideas and go on for 1 sentence. It's like, it depends on you. The more detailed out your, how do I phrase this? Like an example. What's an example? All right. So we just talked about the Qing dynasty. If I want to give an example of how European interventions into China led to a destabilization that brought down the Qing dynasty, and that's my argument, a piece of evidence I could certainly use is the Opium Wars. Now, talking about the Opium Wars, discussing what the Opium Wars were, explaining why they mattered, all that stuff's part of evidence. That'd be one piece. Like, all that stuff is one piece. That might be 3 sentences. That could be 3 paragraphs. But that's like one piece. Like, that's it. It's the same concept, same idea, and I'm talking about all its various applications. That's how much you'd have to have there. That'd be the way I view it. So again, the second one is to take those arguments you're making, those topic sentences, and then making sure that you link them back to the introduction, so that way you're given credit for supporting your argument. And then finally, analysis and reasoning. So analysis is simply the fancy point. That's what that is. Reasoning is this point over here. which is actually very easy to get typically. You keep the essay written in the skill that it calls to. So, for example, if it mentions, what are the differences between this? What is the cause of that? What is, what is the effect of having done this policy? Something like that. That's how that all works. Okay? So that's the way the rubric breaks down. All right. I am feeling exhausted. I don't know if it's obvious or not, but I'm feeling really tired. Let's see what else we got here. Can I do a paragraph of counter arguments and properties of it? Yeah, you could, sure. I don't know if it's going to get you the point, but it can't hurt. That may not be a satisfying answer, but that's reality. It's the way it goes. Right. Isn't the whole reason why you do okay, so Moraine asked about the whole reason Germany wanted to expand their military in terms of everyone under communism. No, the Germans are not communists. The Germans are fascists. At least the Nazis are. There is no communists in Germany that have power really ever. All right? It's not a thing. Now, later, when the Soviet Union comes in and they take over... one moment. All right. We don't insult people. So whoever that was just got kicked. That's that. All right. So, anyway, back to what I was saying. So communism is not a thing in Germany. Now, you might be referring to later when there's East and West Germany, and East Germany's communist. Yeah, because it's controlled by the Soviets who invaded it during World War II and took it away from the Nazi Germans and kept it. And that lasted until the fall of the Berlin Wall. 1989, I want to say, 88, something like that. So anyway, that's what you might be referring to. In which case, that's fine, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, I can't think of anything else at the moment, and my brain is truly fried. All right, so, I'm sorry it was only an hour. I couldn't even tell you what my time between leaving school was like and getting here by 8 o'clock was like. Like I said, I'm still in my coat from work. Like, I haven't even done that. But I do think you guys are ready. What I will say is tomorrow early, probably like 6 a.m., I'm going to post a video onto the Google Classroom. Just, okay, Mo, well, hang on and wait till tomorrow morning. All right. So 6 a.m. tomorrow, you go to Google Classroom. There'll be a video there. If you want a speech, there'll be something like that there. Okay, and you can watch that or not. I think it's a very helpful thing. I think it's important to go over, to listen to, and understand what I'm saying. Well, Mairead, I appreciate that, but I do it my way, and I'll see you in the morning, and it'll be fine. And trust me, it's a good one. All right, so it's something I do every year. So she's fine. All right, don't. All right, so anyway, look, my advice, honestly, go to bed. Go to bed. Don't stay up studying. Go to bed. There is nothing that's going to happen between now and the test tomorrow that's going to change what you know. All you're doing at this point is anxiety management. That's all you're doing. Fair enough, you're allowed to be anxious. But if you want a couple of bits of wisdom, here you go. Remember, it does not matter how you do. I know mom and dad might be there right now and being like, this man's out of his mind, he's smoking crack. No, I'm not. You've already done the hard thing. You've taken on a challenge other students ran from. That is the win of my course. The win is not what you get in the AP exam. If you get a 3, bravo. You get a 4, bravo. You get a 5, bravo. I don't give out medals. I don't give out special praise. I'll tell you what I used to do. Here, you want a quick story? Here's a quick story. I used to keep a poster in my classroom that I updated every year. I had it printed out on canvas of every kid that got a 5 on my AP exams. And it was like Malvagnol's Wall of Fame or something like that, whether it was macro or AP World. And then I realized one year when I was a little older and a little wiser that that's a disgusting thing to post up, and I'll tell you why. It's because a lot of why kids get 5s have very little to do with me. In fact, it often doesn't have much at all to do with me. All right? Some people... Anyway, some people are born with real gifts. I'm never dunking a basketball. I can't do that. My gifts lie somewhere else. So if somebody works their absolute ass off, all right, I'll help you with that thesis. Hang tight, Kareem. If someone works their absolute ass off, they get what they deserve. And if what they deserve is a 3 and they work their tail off for it, there's a very strong chance they work just as hard as the kid who got a 5. And I'm here to celebrate both of them. So that's the way I view it. So I took that chart down. I never did it anymore because I don't want the kid who gets a 3 to feel like they lost. That's not the way it goes. All right? At all. If you get a 2, I'm still proud of you. I promise it's true. I really, truly do. I promise. I'm still proud of you. Make no mistake about it. All right. So back to this actual real question. Kareem asks, hi, I had trouble making my thesis. How can I find 2 evidence for my thesis? All right. We talk about the LEQ, the DBQ. Let's do both. All right. So, if you're doing the LEQ, how do you come up with 2 pieces of evidence? DBQ. All right, that's easier. DBQ is easier. So when you say pieces of evidence, right? What in your thesis? Here's what you're doing. On the DBQ, you're going to get 7 documents. They're chosen intentionally by the test. They know what they're doing. You're going to look for themes that the documents support. Do this with any practice DBQ you can find. Look for themes the documents can support. And you go, okay, these 3 documents all seem to indicate that Muslim women are really trying to find a new way to get rights and freedoms in a modern Islamic world of like a place like Iran. In all 3 places, these are women pushing back against traditional authority. That's a theme. Find another group of documents, maybe it's 2 documents, that have a similar theme. The theme you come up with between those 2 documents, that's your evidentiary piece of information that's going to drive your body paragraphs. So what you're going to do is you're going to write your DBQ thesis like that. You know, you can say Muslim women in the 20th century often challenged social norms in order to gain more rights to themselves. 2 ways you can demonstrate this is by the way in which Muslim women challenge traditional societal norms about marriage, divorce, and whatever, and also the way in which they started to be more educated in formal settings as their male counterparts were. Those are 2 themes. And let's just pretend for a minute that those themes are something you can find inside the documents. You then that's your thesis. You write that down. Done. When you get to your body paragraph, you take the first thing we talked about. Women were challenging social norms and dress codes and things like that and seeking divorce, boop, boop, boop. And you take that line and you bring it to your body paragraph, and that becomes the topic sentence of your body paragraph, which creates an automatic chain link between the body and the thesis, and that creates the structure that gets you a support point. All right, so that's the same thing you're doing in the LEQ. You just don't have documents. You got to do it with what's in your head. That's the difference. And then you write about the documents in those DBQ paragraphs. Okay, in document 1, we see a woman who told her husband, I hate you, go to hell, I want a divorce. And this was unheard of in the Muslim world at the time. In fact, her own mother even said, are you crazy? What are you doing? What's going to happen to you if you divorce? Just use the information from the document. And that, by the least, will do it. All right? All right, so... Anyway, so that's how I would do it, Kareem. I think that's the best help and the best way to handle it. That's certainly the way I've taught it all my career, and the evidence of my grade seems to show that it's a good way of doing it because my kids tend to do very, very well, especially on writing. All right. What else? All right. It looks like we've gone off the rails in chat a little bit. Nothing particularly crazy, just some banter. That's fine. All right. Well, I hope it has been helpful. I think for at best I'm lucky, but if I'm being real, I'm trying for a 3. All right. So, Mr. Dretman, whoever you are, or Mr. Edmund, it does not matter what you know. This isn't a test about what you know. It's a test about how you use what you know. All right? I don't like to make a stupid analogy, but it goes something like this, right? It's the Karate Kid movie. You know, do you know one punch really, 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 really well? Or do you know 10 punches in a mediocre way? You know, if you've ever done anything like that, wrestling, etc., someone who's really good at one particular thing, maybe it's a guard, maybe it's a hold, maybe it's something like that, they may have a limited toolkit, but God help you, if they find a way to use that toolkit in the situation they're in, they're going to win. And that's what you have to do. You don't sit there and go, man, I don't know all of history. Man, I don't know all of history. You know, there's more crap out there I don't know than I do know. You realize that, right? So, that's the situation. So you don't want to be out there worrying about, well, I don't know everything. Your teacher doesn't know everything. I've been doing this for 22 years. I don't know most things. That's the way it's supposed to be. People who tell you they know everything, they're idiots. They're liars. All right? You can never do that. So how would I make a thesis on this prompt? Evaluate the extent to which you like. All right, so let's do that prompt. Let's do it. I'm going to treat that like an LEQ prompt, though, Kareem. All right? Because I don't have any DBQs here. I don't have a document. So, Kareem, let's just do it. I got a bit of a second win, so why not? Let's just do this. Can I copy this? No, apparently not. All right. Let's take Kareem's thing. Let's just do this. All right. So, Kareem says, Enlightenment thought continued to be influenced political and social debates across the world throughout the period. All right. That's interesting. That sounds like a third-party prompt. It doesn't sound like an AP prompt. That social debate thing, that sounds like, you know, somebody like Heinler made that stuff up. That doesn't sound like a real AP prompt. But we'll do it. It's fine. So let me just get the font size. What the hell did I just do there? Let's get the font size nice and large. Boom, boom, boom. All right. All right, here we go. All right. All right. The concepts of the Enlightenment had a large impact on the development of political and social. Oh, God. Big fat head in the way. Hold on. See, this is why I look at my stream camera or my stream screen and not look at the camera. Because if I look at the stream screen, I can see where my head's in the way or whatever's going on in chat. So if you wonder why I'm looking off camera all the time, that's why. All right. Okay, social issues, development of political and social issues across the world in the period post 1750. No, I guess not post 1750 CE to 1900 CE. This is I'm writing this in the simplest way I can, a way I think a student would do it, you know, at the bare level. This is demonstrated by, we got some easy ones in here, right? Because you got the American Revolution, you can easily do that. You can do the French Revolution, you can easily do that. You can do Napoleon and the Napoleonic Code, you can easily do that. You can do 1900, too soon for India. Yeah, let's use Europe. So this feels like an AP Euro essay, actually. It doesn't even feel like a world history essay. But anyway, this is demonstrated by the impact of John Locke's natural rights on the Atlantic revolutions, as well as the influence of I'm thinking of another Enlightenment concept that's big enough to take this, as well as the let's do Voltaire. Yeah, Voltaire. The influence of Voltaire and his absolutist approach to free speech in political and social thought. There you go. There's your prompt. So when you do your body paragraphs, the first one's going to be about John Locke's life, liberty, and property, and how that influences the American, French, Haitian, and Latin American revolutions. Have a good time. Your second paragraph in the body will be about Voltaire and his insistence, like his famous quote is something this is, I think, the quote, but it could be slightly paraphrased. All right, hang on with that. And so so Voltaire said, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. That whole thing, that's that part of it. Yeah. Anyway, so that's how I do it. Now, your question, good follow-up question. So I can ignore the continued part. No, I wouldn't ignore anything. In fact, development as a word implies over time, right? Development is the implication that something happened over time. It's not sudden at all, right? So, and by the way, we said developed over 1750 to 1900. So, you talk about it that way. I mean, I'm actually taking some fairly broad time frames here, right? I mean, I could, for example, talk about the absolute approach to freedom of speech and political thought and stretch it all the way from 1750 to 1950, no problem. Now, Voltaire, I have to place him in time and place, but that's how I would do it. So that's how I do it. And in the body, you could talk about this is a process that continues to happen or continued to happen. Happened in the American Revolution, then it happened here, then it happened there. Then we see it being used by Gandhi in the future, talking about these John Lockean Enlightenment principles. You could see this all over the place. The British government will use enlightenment and property rights as a justification for opium trading. Oh, I have a right to do what I want. It's free speech, freedom of thought, my freedom to choose my own way, right? Lockean principles. That's all there. Tune in tomorrow morning, right? 6 a.m. John Locke is the natural rights guy. Yes. I hope you should. I hope you could sleep. Nobody here should lose sleep. It's just a test. You're not getting married. You're not going to war. It's just a test. Don't make it what it's not. It's the hardest test you've ever taken, but it's still just a test, right? There will be easy things in life that are far more important than this hard test. Treat it with the respect. The respect you have to treat this is not the respect of the test. Respect your effort the entire year working at this. And that's why you should do well at the test. Not because the test is hard, because you put in a year's worth of effort, and now's not the time to throw that away. That's the thing you're looking to respect. Don't respect the test, respect yourself. All right? All right, guys, I think I'm going to call it. As much as that was a second win, I'm going to be honest, I'm kind of shot. It's been a day. So I'll be there early. Not too early. My normal 6:45, I'll be there. And that's going to be it. Go to sleep. Don't worry about it. It is what it is. Everybody on the globe is taking the same test. If you find it difficult, so did they. If you find it easy, so do they. It doesn't work out in your favor either way. No problem, guys. All right. So have a good one. I'm going to shut this thing down before someone says something truly crazy. And we'll call it there, all right? Hour and 31 minutes. Not too bad. Later, guys. See you tomorrow. It's not super hot there. You should be comfortable. I wouldn't worry about it.